I'm really honored and delighted to engage in this Jewish spiritual practice with you. Just a quick bit of information about the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. For those who are not familiar, it's an organization that's been around for over 20 years, and it is devoted to infusing Jewish life with through mindfulness practice, through Jewish mindfulness practice, to infuse all of Jewish life with the spiritual dimension. That is, to understand the whole range of Jewish practices, whether it's learning, prayer, mitzvot, interactions, social justice, to infuse all of that with a level of awareness and consciousness and intentionality. And that's what we do in a variety of ways. And if you're interested in checking it out some more, the website is jewishspirituality.org. So today we'll get a little bit of a taste of that. I appreciate the invitation to do a little bit of learning about Slichot, and I'll say more about that in a moment, and to engage in the practice. So our plan for the next 45 minutes is to learn a little bit, and then hopefully to engage in a little bit of Jewish mindfulness meditation to give you a sense, to give you a flavor of what it is that IJS offers and how we do it, and how we try to enliven traditional Jewish practice in a way that makes it meaningful, relevant, and immediately applicable for people in our daily lives. So, Slichot, just a bit of definition to begin with. Slichot literally means penances or forgivenesses. And it refers to a collection of prayers, a set of liturgical set or piece, which is traditionally done in this season. In the Sephardic tradition, these are prayers that are recited, penitential prayers that are recited from throughout the month of Elul, which we're in. Of course, this is the last week of the month of Elul. And in the Ashkenazic tradition, they are recited beginning on the Saturday night / Sunday morning, the week before Rosh Hashanah, unless Rosh Hashanah falls early in the week, because we want to allow at least 4 days of reciting these prayers called Slichot. And they're within those categories of Sephardic Slichot and Ashkenazic Slichot. There are multiple customs and approaches and collections, but they all share one common feature. They're all devoted to cultivating the capacity to practice forgiveness towards other people and to seek forgiveness for the ways in which we, as fallible human beings, miss the mark. You probably know, or if you don't, I'll share with you that there is no real Hebrew word that is the equivalent of sin, as sin is generally used in English. The Hebrew word that's used is chet, which literally means to miss the mark. So when we talk about being fallible human beings, not really fulfilling our highest intentions, not really doing the best that we are capable of, we're not talking about something that is fundamentally wrong with us. We're talking about the ways in which our execution has kind of strayed from our intention. And in Judaism, the spiritual practice is really pretty simple. We set an intention to do our very best. We know in advance that we're going to miss the mark probably more often than not. And when we do, we don't beat ourselves up. We notice the ways in which we missed, we make adjustments, and we return. The Hebrew word tshuva, which is also problematically translated as repentance, literally means return. So this is the season of returning, and particularly what's coming up, the days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, which are known as the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of Tshuva, 10 days of returning to intention. So I want to do a deeper dive into the heart of the Slicho liturgy, and it's built around a narrative that comes from the Torah, and it's probably a narrative that you're familiar with because it has to do with the building of the golden calf by the Israelites and the aftermath. That takes place in the book of Exodus. Of course, the book of Exodus tells the story of the Israelites leaving Egypt, becoming a free people, and then trekking to Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. They receive the 10 Commandments. Moses goes up on Mount Sinai to get the fine print, to get the details, and the people wait at the foot of the mountain. And as you probably know, they get impatient after 40 days because they're concerned that Moses isn't going to get back in time. And so they have Aaron construct this golden calf to worship, and they attribute their freedom and their liberation to this calf. God tells Moses about it up on the top of Mount Sinai and says to Moses, oh, these people have really, shall we say, missed the mark. Let me wipe them out and make you a great nation. And Moses says, no, you can't do that because what will everyone else think about what has happened? What will they think about you as the liberator of the Israelites if you wipe them out here? You can't do that. And anyway, you promised our ancestors, the patriarchs and matriarchs, that you would be with us. And God says, okay, good points. And then Moses goes down the mountain, and when he sees what's going on at the foot of the mountain, he essentially loses it. He takes the tablets of the commandments and smashes them on the ground in what certainly appears like a moment of rage, smashes the tablets and essentially says to the people, look what you made me do. Now I have to go back and ask forgiveness. And there follows a little period of time where there's some negotiations between God and Moses about whether, in fact, God will accompany the people forward, whether God will stay in relationship with the people. And little by little, Moses negotiates with God until God finally says, okay, I'll go with the people. And then Moses, with great chutzpah, says to God, Hareini na et kavodecha, please, God, show me your kavod, as if to say, let me know what you're really about, God. Let me know what your essence. And here's where we have this famous passage where God says, well, I can't go quite that far because no human being can see my face and live. In other words, human beings can't pierce the veil completely between the human and the divine, but I can take you this far. I will station you in a crack in the rock, and I will make all my goodness pass before you. And that's where we get the scene. So I just wanted to set the scene and share with you the text of the Torah that I'm talking about here. These are the lyrics from that song by Iris Dement, Sweet Forgiveness, that those of you who joined us a little bit early got to hear. So this is from Exodus chapter 34. I'm going to just scroll down to the English. So I'm going to paraphrase the first paragraph just in the interest of time. God says to Moses, carve 2 tablets of stone like the first. I'll inscribe on them the words that were on the first tablets, which you shattered, by the way. Be ready in the morning, come up to Mount Sinai and present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. We have nobody else, no flocks, just you. So Moses carves the 2 tablets, goes up to Mount Sinai, taking the tablets with him. And this is where we get the key passage. The Holy One descends in a cloud, stands with him there, and proclaims the name Yud He Vav He. That's the proper name of God in the Torah. And the Holy One passed before him and proclaimed, and here I'm going to scroll up to the Hebrew for a sec. God says, here we are. Just going to try to highlight so you see where we are. There. God says, Adonai, Adonai, abbreviated there in the Hebrew, El Rachum v'chanun erech hapayim v'rab chesed ve'emet, notzer chesed la'alafim, nosei avon v'fesha v'chata'a v'nakeh. V'nakeh lo nenakeh, poked avon avot al banim v'al b'nei banim, v'al shleshim al ribeim. So that's the whole passage. What does that say? The English is, Adonai, God says to Moses, Adonai, Adonai, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. This may be familiar to those of you who have been around on Yom Kippur and Yom Kippur's past. But in the original context, it continues, yet does not remit all punishment, but visits the iniquity of parents upon children and children's children to the third and fourth generations. Hearing this, Moses hastened to bow low to the ground in homage and says, if I've gained your favor, my Lord, pray let my Lord go in our midst, even though this is a stiff-necked people. Pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your own. That's the passage in the Torah. Liturgically, in the Slichot Liturgy, which is, and this is there are, of course, a number of prayers, including the confession, the vidui, and other liturgical poems that are part of Selichot. But the heart of it is this passage, which takes from that story these what are called the Shlosh Esrei Midot, 13 qualities, attributes, ways of the divine, which in the context of the story of the golden calf really represents the essence of God. And even though we frequently hear about the, quote, wrathful God of the, quote, Old Testament, in essence, I think it's really important, I always have felt strongly about this, that we as Jews understand that at the heart of the Torah and at the heart of the passage where you might say there's reason for anger and for frustration on the part of God, here what we learn is that God is infinitely forgiving. It is striking. So here's the prayer. We pray, God, sovereign who sits on a throne of mercy, acting with unbounded grace, forgiving the sins of your people one by one, as each comes before you, generously forgiving sinners, pardoning transgressors, acting charitably with every living thing, do not repay them for their misdeeds. And then references these 13 attributes. God, you taught us how to recite the 13 attributes of your name. Remember the promise implied in those 13 attributes, which you first revealed to Moses, the humble one, as it is written, and then it quotes the Torah, the passage we just read. God descended in a cloud, stood before him, and Moses called the name Adonai, and Adonai passed before him and called. And there's that passage that I just read, except that it ends with Vinake and grants pardon. In other words, the rabbis who constructed the prayer kind of audaciously and with quite a bit of chutzpah cut off the passage that we looked at above that says, yeah, I'm forgiving, but I do visit the iniquity of parents on children and children's children to the third and fourth generations. See, the original, in other words, the original context describes God as quite forgiving, but with a limit. Whereas liturgically, the rabbis are using that passage without that part at the end about visiting the sins of the children upon their children and their children's children. This is really just a description of the heart of God as forgiveness in 13 different variations, that God is eternally forgiving, loving, merciful, patient, full of grace, full of unconditional love. And that is quite powerful to me. And then Moses, in response to that, falls to his knees and says, pardon our iniquity and our sin and claim us for your own. And what follows in the Torah's context after that is a reenactment of the Brit, a new covenant or a revision of the covenant between God and the Jewish people. And this time the covenant is rooted in that quality of everlasting love and forgiveness. In other words, it's a relationship that God says, I'm in this for good. I will never leave you. I'll be with you no matter what. Now, not all of us have had the experience of receiving unconditional love and forgiveness in that way. And we may have different habitual reactions to that. Some of us may really struggle with that, have a hard time believing that's possible or believing it's so. Some of us may push it away. Some of us may welcome it and say, I know what that feels like. I had my booby or my softa or my grandmother or my parent, I know what it feels like to receive that from somebody or my partner. I know what it's like to be forgiven, to receive love, to feel like somebody's with me no matter what, or a good friend. who's with you through thick or thin, regardless of what happens. So the Slichot prayer uses that, and that is at the heart of what we do in this last week of Elul. If you're an Ashkenazic Jew, if you're a Sephardic Jew, you've been immersed in that for a month of immersion in trying to get into our heads and our hearts the idea that if we turn to God, if we can acknowledge our imperfection, if we can be vulnerable and let our guard down and freely confess without shame, but freely acknowledge the ways in which we have missed the mark, we will be met by the quality of forgiveness, compassion, patience, and supported in our return to our intention. So I wanted to share that as a lead-in, and that's the essence of Slichot. And by the way, that prayer is repeated as a mantra over and over and over again on Yom Kippur in the liturgy of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a day of immersion, like a 25-hour retreat of immersion in forgiveness, compassion towards self and towards others, where we do our best to release any resentments or grudges we may have towards others, and we do our very best to release any self-recrimination or self-blame that we might have, so that we can just say, this is a time to wipe the slate clean and to start again and to reset our intention and to learn from the ways in which we have missed the mark in the past year. I'm going to pause there for a second. There is one more little piece of text I want to share, and then want to invite us into practice. And maybe Julie, you can keep an eye on the chat. If there's a question, you can feel free to interrupt or interject.
Sure.
Okay, so this is a very short passage. This is from one of my favorite books to read. One of my favorite books to read at this time of year. A classic book by Martin Buber called Hasidism and Modern Man. Sick, forgive the modern man. But it's about Hasidism. And he references the story about the Rabbi of Ger, who in a sermon on Yom Kippur warned against self-torture. And this is the sermon, the essence of the sermon. One who's done ill and talks about it and thinks about it all the time does not cast the base thing one did out of one's thoughts. And whenever one thinks, therein one is. One's soul is wholly and utterly in what one thinks. And so such a person dwells in baseness. One will certainly not be able to turn, for one's spirit will grow coarse and one's heart stubborn. In addition to this, one may be overcome by gloom. So what would you do? Rake the muck this way, rake the muck that way. It will always be muck. Have I sinned? Have I not sinned? What does heaven get out of it? What does God care about that? In the time I am brooding over it, I could be stringing pearls for the delight of heaven. And that's why it's written, Sur me'ra va'aseh tov, depart from evil and do good. Turn wholly away from evil. Do not dwell on it. Do good. You've done wrong, counteract it by doing right. It's just a great, that's all you really need for Yom Kippur. To say which is to say that when we have thoughts of those self-recriminations or the harsh self-judgment, they may serve a purpose, but there is a danger in them as well. And the danger is that we can get lost in them. And that guilt, the twinge of guilt for the ways in which we missed the mark, can slide sometimes into what we might call toxic shame, meaning that I may have done something I regret, but it can become, I am something I regret. I'm unworthy. And this passage from Selichot, the practice of Selichot, is the practice of catching ourselves before we slide down that we slide down that scale, and enables us to catch us and say, just the way we would treat a toddler who slips and falls on the sidewalk, we wouldn't berate them. We would lift them up, and we might say, watch, we're going to watch our step. We have to watch out for the crack in the sidewalk, or we have to tie our shoes, more properly, or make sure they're tight, with a kindness and with a love and with a kind of a tenderness towards us. And the question for each of us is whether we can treat ourselves and treat others who have that kind of tenderness. Last thing I'll say before we practice is that we are made, according to Jewish tradition, the premise is that we are made in the divine image, which means that everything we say about God, or everything that Jewish tradition says about God, we're basically saying it about ourselves as well. So just as God is described, or God describes God's self, as it were, in that passage, as infinitely forgiving, we have that capacity within us. We have all 13 of those qualities within us. We have the ability to be patient. We have the ability to let things go. We have the ability to forgive. We have the ability to love ourselves and others without strings. That's pretty powerful stuff. Why is it so hard to forgive ourselves for our wrongdoing? Well, that is the question. I would say, if I can only speak for myself, I think there's a mixture that there is within Jewish tradition itself. I think there is a stream which can support a sense of perfectionism. That is, we learn that we're here to repair and perfect the world. We're supposed to bring the Messiah. We're supposed to make this world a perfect place, like the Garden of Eden. And so in that aspiration, there's the danger of thinking we need to be perfect. So there is, there's that stream. That's, I would say that's a cultural thing. I would say also that as a people who have experienced untold trauma in our history and our not such distant history, that trauma has an impact as well on how we understand ourselves. Trauma, we know, can be directly connected to a sense of shame or lack of worth. When people have been oppressed and degraded, we can internalize others' projections, others' opinions about us. And so that's in the mix too, not to mention whatever our family of origins issues are. So pull it all together, there's plenty of reason why we are sometimes or often our own harshest critic. And here's the thing, nothing wrong with that as long as we notice that that's what's happening. And this is where Jewish mindfulness comes into play. Mindfulness is really growing in awareness of the processes that are happening within us. In other words, we might be beating ourselves up, but there's a difference between beating ourselves up about something and being aware that we are beating ourselves up, where we say, oh, here I go again. Here's that tape playing. Here's that voice in my head that is saying, see, I knew you were a screw up. I knew you couldn't do that. Or that's the way you really are. Forget about that time you did it right, or you were kind or generous. But in this case, this is that lens that gives weight to the more critical voice than to the more accepting voice. So here's the flow, and then let's practice. The tradition tells us that from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, God, as it were, moves from one throne, from one seat to the other. What are the seats that God shifts from? The first is the seat of Din, which is the seat of judgment. Now, I'm going to encourage us to think about Din as a quality of noticing distinction. In other words, it's the part of us that enables us to notice and see, ooh, I missed the mark on that one. That didn't come out the way I intended it. Or I really could have done, I'd like a do-over. I could have done that better. Or, I don't know why I wasn't kinder than I could have been there. That is Din. That is where we notice, I wish that could have been different. And that serves us well. Rosh Hashanah is for that. It's for identifying the ways in which we've missed the mark. But then over those 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, tradition says, God moves to the seat of Rachamim, of compassion, until on Yom Kippur, we are immersed in a day that is a day of chesed, of loving kindness, of Rachamim, of compassion, and dare I say, of chen, of grace, which is a moment of unconditional love and acceptance. So that's the flow. And we do this dance, this integration between Din and Rachamim, where what we're trying to do, and we'll try to do this in a meditation, is notice that critical voice arising and greet it as a friend, not try to push it away, but also to try not to exacerbate it, not to have a judgment about having judgments about ourselves, but instead to see if we can meet it and soften it with compassion. So that's what we're going to practice now. So I invite you, whether you've ever meditated or not, whether you're an experienced meditator, it doesn't really matter. Just try this out as an experiment. Find yourself in your seat. You might have forgotten that you're sitting on something. So you might remember that you, in fact, are sitting on a chair. And if you can, place the soles of your feet on the floor, just to be grounded, feel supported. If you're in a chair with a back, you might push back against the seat back a little bit and let yourself release into the chair. Or if you're sitting on a sofa, a soft chair, easy chair, just let gravity pull you down and hold you to the earth. Just noticing that is amazing. You know, we're attached to this planet. We're not flying off into space. We're securely rooted. And you might even spread your toes if you can, and press them down into the ground, so that you experience yourself as rooted to this planet. You are part of this planet. And the crown of your head, that is the top of your skull, you can gently kind of press that up towards the sky, just to create a sense of length between the soles of your feet and the top of your head. And then just let your hands rest in whatever position feels comfortable for you. They can be clasped in your lap. You can have them face down on top of your thighs if you're comfortable having them facing up. Letting them open a little bit in a receiving position. Whatever is comfortable for you. There's no right or wrong here. And if you're comfortable allowing your eyes to close, you can do that. And if you're not so comfortable with that, you can, instead of having a sharp focus on the screen, you can soften your focus, like soften your gaze so that you're not distracted. Your eyes can be open, but you're not really looking. And allow yourself to receive a couple of breaths deep into your belly. And just to be present. Hineni, I'm here. You can sort of say that to yourself. I'm here. I'm alive right now, right here. So for a few minutes, we're going to practice this Slichot practice, this forgiveness practice with an intention. So I invite you to choose your own intention for being present in this moment or moment to moment. For a lot of people, the easiest focal point is the breath. Just to notice the breath as it arises and passes into your body through your nostrils, down into your lungs and into your belly, with as much curiosity as you can muster, following the breath as it comes into your body, as it fills your lungs and your belly, and as your body on its own compresses to release the breath, and you exhale through your mouth. Let's just stay with that. That's our intention. Some people suggest numbering the breaths as a way of staying with it, staying with the focus. But in this case, it doesn't really matter if you are able to stay with the intention. The important thing is what happens when you notice you've lost it and you're daydreaming or thinking about something else, maybe wondering when this will be over, or forming an opinion about how good a meditator or how bad a meditator you are. So just allow yourself to breathe. Your kavanah, your intention is to stay focused moment by moment by moment by moment on where you are in your cycle of breathing, how it feels in your body, what comes up in your mind. And when you forget, notice what happens when you wake up and remember to come back to the intention. It's a tshuva practice. So notice if at the moment when you become aware that you have missed the mark and strayed from that intention, which is inevitable, if there's a little sting, how much that stings to realize that? See if you have a judgment or an opinion about yourself or about this process when you realize, oh, I forgot, oh, I was supposed to focus on my breath. Started thinking about dinner. Come back, start again. Can I be forgiving of my inconstancy? Can I be forgiving for my forgetfulness? Can I be okay with missing the mark and coming back? Or do I think, well, I missed it, I'm off track anyway, so I might as well just go for it and plan out the menu for dinner. Forget about the intention. I blew it. Come back to the intention of noticing the inhalation and the exhalation. Resting in the breath. Remembering, forgetting, remembering. Let's come back to awareness of the breath. And this time, I'm going to make use of the breath and imagine the inhalation as a breath of that loving, forgiving energy that brings inner release. So see if you notice any place in your body that is holding tension, that feels constricted. Might be your belly, might be your chest, might be your shoulders, your neck. For a lot of us, it's our jaw. And as you breathe in, as you receive an inhalation, see if you can just direct that to those places of constriction, tension, fear, anger, pain. And see if that opens that up a little bit, makes it a little bit more spacious. If you'd like, you can even use your fingertips to massage or just gently touch any part of your body where you're feeling the tightness, where the judgments are lodged in the body, the jaw, forehead, temples. We're immersing in these 13 midot, these 13 qualities of patience and love and forgiveness and mercy and grace, compassion, kindness. Continue to kind of soften. If you're comfortable with it, you can place your hand over your heart space and notice the difference. You can experience that hand as your own hand, or as the hand of somebody who truly loves you and accepts you for who you are, who's whispering to you, I forgive you, I accept you, I love you as you are.
Mark, you're muted.
Sorry, okay. I invite you to bring to mind one instance from this past year, maybe even recently, this past week, in which you feel that you missed the mark in a big way or in a small way. Some words you would have preferred not to have said. An email or text you would have preferred not to have sent. An action you would have preferred not to have taken. Or an action you wish you had taken, or a word you wish you had said, or someplace where you were just not at your best. And notice how that feels in your body, what thoughts come up in your mind when you bring that moment to your awareness. And see if you can soften around that judgment. That little moment of Dean where you say, I could have done that differently. Where there's that pang of regret, which serves as a wake-up call to reset the intention to do it differently the next time around. And if there's an inclination to compound that awareness with additional judgment or some generalization about ourselves, just notice that and set it to the side. This is practicing Slichot. This is practicing softening around judgments of ourself and enveloping it with kindness, compassion, and love. And this is noticing whatever our challenges are in receiving the possibility of forgiveness for our imperfection, our inherent fallibility. We are human beings, flesh and blood. As the liturgy of the High Holiday says, we come from dust and will return to dust. We are not God. We are not perfect, and we're not expected to be perfect. And finally, I invite you to use this exercise to practice and observe what it means, what it might mean to forgive another who has hurt us. So choose a situation or a person who, and here I would invite you not to go to any situation of someone who's caused you grievous harm. Just could be somebody in your inner circle, your family or a friend who disappointed you or didn't come through in some way. Something that you could easily have done towards them. Think about that moment when you felt the pain of whatever that was. And here too, you might want to have your hand address that pain by just placing it over your heart and offering yourself some comfort, acknowledging that pain, and seeing if there's a moment when you can choose whether to release that hurt or whether to dwell in it, whether to hold a grudge or to stoke a resentment. And just realizing sometimes that there's a choice can be helpful. If this is a person whom you love, who has nevertheless missed the mark with regard to you, see what it's like to whisper, "I forgive you. I love you." How does it feel to release that? Release the resentment, release the grudge, release the temptation to nurture resentment. So for the last couple of minutes of this practice, I invite you to choose one of those. Self-compassion, self-forgiveness, unconditional love, offering it to yourself with your hand over your heart or with your hands facing up, or breathing into the constrictions, soothing your own pain, your own guilt or shame. Or choosing to offer forgiveness towards someone you love who's let you down, hurt you in some way, said something perhaps unkind or insensitive, maybe something they regret. What do you gain by forgiving? And what do you lose by forgiving? And then let's spend the last minute just coming back to the breath. Breathing in that message of Slichot, those 13 qualities of mercy and forgiveness, and preparing ourselves to immerse in those qualities at this time of year. May acceptance and forgiveness be a path towards transformation for ourselves, for each other, and for this world. I invite you to, if your eyes have been closed, to open them. If your gaze has been softened, to sharpen the focus. And I want to thank you for joining me in this practice and invite you to make use of it over the holidays. As I said, traditionally in Ashkenazic tradition, Selichot is said Saturday night, usually traditionally after midnight, which is understood as a time of judgment. So it meets judgment with that compassion. But this is actually a practice which is a Jewish practice for throughout the year. This is its highlight season, but always available.